Today we're going to be talking about lowering springs, some of the positives, negatives, and when it comes down to a choice between budget coilovers and lowering springs, which route we would take. Lowering springs are a really popular upgrade on the F8X platform BMWs. So apart from being aesthetically pleasing, in the sense that it drops the ride height and therefore there's less arch gap, so it looks a bit meatier and looks a lot nicer out on the roads, they also give a lot of dynamic benefits. So one thing they achieve is they lower the car, which therefore lowers the center of gravity of the chassis. Now what that does is it reduces something called the roll moment, which means that the car physically rolls less through the corner. The actual chassis is pivoting over a lot less, so you feel a lot more stable and comfortable as a driver as the chassis moves less through the corners. That's also achieved by the springs being slightly stiffer than OEM. So in the case of the Drawbacks, they're roughly 20% stiffer than stock. That's a really nice increase, so you're not losing a lot on the road, but you're gaining a lot through the corners in terms of chassis stiffness and again controlling the chassis through the corners. The Drawback kit in particular provides a larger drop on the front than it does at the rear, which also increases the rake angle over what the car comes with as standard. Now increasing the rake angle, which means that the car has the nose down more than it does on the rear. So looking at the sill on the side, the front comes downhill as you come towards the front of the car. This gives the car a nose down attitude, which means that it gives better turning, better grip under braking and a more stable chassis through the corners. And as you load onto the throttle, what it does is levels out that rake angle, especially on these BMWs, and it gives the traction back and prevents the understeer on corner exit as you're loading it up. So rake angle has a lot of benefits, especially out on circuit when you're really pushing the car through its paces, and out on the roads as well. It gives a much more neutral balance to that chassis dynamically. We consider lowering springs as quite a nice OEM Plus upgrade, so although you're getting the benefits of the lower, stiffer car, you're not losing a lot of the original aspects of the original car, such as the M4. So it's not all of a sudden becoming a super low, aggressively firm track car. You're still keeping the subtlety for road use, but you're just getting slight increments of change. So 20% stiffer on the spring, not 50, 60% stiffer, so it's not really aggressive. And you're keeping a lot of the original componentry underneath the car as well. So the OEM dampers, which control how soft and supple the car is on the roads, you're not losing that. And in the case of the F8X, M3 and M4, you also get to retain the electronic dampers. So if your car has electronic dampers, that's all still retained. So all your switches inside the car is still fully usable and all works as it would before, but you just get those added benefits of putting the spring in there. In the case of this car, it's also got the upgraded Bilstein dampers, which are the next step really. So when we're talking about OEM Plus, that would be the OEM Plus upgrade in terms of dampers. So a lot more supple and less crashy than the OEM BMW damper, but again works in conjunction with the lowering spring to give them a really nice fast road package that can still be used on track and benefit from there too. As we like to show in our videos, there are also some drawbacks to upgrading your car. It's not always positive. So some of the drawbacks to the lowering spring being quite a cost-effective upgrade is you don't get the height adjustability in general. So you're limited to what that spring is designed to drop the car by. So if it's a 20mm lowering spring, it's going to drop the car by 20mm, and that's what you've got. So you don't have the option to go up or down based on your preferences or your driving style. You are fixed to what the spring is designed to drop the car by. That's not so much of a negative because it is still better than the OEM height. You're still going lower and you're still getting a bit firmer. So it's a better positioning than OEM, but the drawback is you just don't get to then fine-tune that position. One of the main drawbacks though to lowering springs, and why really they get a bad rep over time as well, is this on the whiteboard. So it's to do with the positioning internally of the damper when you fit the lowering spring to it. So on the left here, we've just drawn some really basic diagrams of a damper. The rectangles indicate the damper body, and then this sort of T-shaped part here represents the piston inside the damper. So on the left, we've got the OEM damper, and we're saying that as standard, the piston has 100mm of compression travel, and it's got about 100mm, say, of rebound travel, so droop travel in the shock. When we fit the lowering spring, and in this scenario we've used a 30mm lowering spring, it's going to move that piston's position at ride height down inside the body by 30mm. This is going to alter the bump to droop ratio of your OEM shock, and it's going to take away compression travel from the shock absorber. So now, as you can see, at ride height we're down to 70mm of compression travel, not 100mm of compression travel. So as you start getting bigger and bigger drops, like 35 mil, 40 mil in some cases, you're taking it off this compression travel every single time with the standard shock. This can put you in a position where over harsh ground, you can bottom the shock out inside of itself, which can start to cause damage to the shock absorber. So that is one of the big drawbacks. However, if you're sensible with your selection of lowering springs and you stick to something in the region of 20 millimeters, 15 millimeters for more of a subtle drop, then you can look at getting that travel in a more comfortable position. So you're not losing too much from the compression travel, and it's not as much of a big deal as if we're going into sort of the 40 millimeter region. Another side of it is if you have electronic shocks. So something we've come across on the VW platforms, like the TTs, for example, where they have the mag ride. When they've had lowering springs fitted, this new position isn't calibrated into the system, and it actually makes the shocks really firm because they're quite clever. So what they do is as the mag ride shock goes into compression, it firms the damping up to prevent them from bottoming out internally. But when we lower the ride height with a lowering spring, it moves it into the window where it thinks it needs to start firming up. So it's a very good idea if you have mag ride and lowering springs fitted to your car to get the mag ride recalibrated somewhere so that the shock knows that that's its new neutral position, and it will stop that really harsh aggressive damper from occurring, and you'll get back to a really nice supple ride. So that's quite a nice little tip. So that's the main drawbacks. Once you've fitted your springs as well, it's very important to remember that your car is going to need to be realigned, because as the suspension has gone into a new position, you've lowered it, it's all travelled upwards in the wheel arches, the geometry will be affected by things like camber gain and bump steer, which can knock those settings out, and it can lead to the car feeling not very nice to drive, a little bit sketchy, different levels of grip at each corner. So it's very, very advisable to have a geometry alignment completed following the installation of lowering springs. One of the questions we're asked a lot here is, with the lowering springs coming into the price territory of the really budget coilover market, is am I better going for a coilover over a lowering spring? So you can gain from, say, the ride height adjustability on the coilover unit, but we are in the faction of stick with lowering springs in this case. So the budget coilovers are often not dynoed upon completion, and you really don't know what you're getting in terms of valving out of that box, and often all four dampers are mismatched. They're actually different rates of valving, and they perform differently at each corner on the car, so that can lead to its own issues out on the roads. The next thing is that the levels of corrosion, so they can corrode heavily within a year, so they won't even be adjustable anymore, and internally they can start to seize and jam up on the adjusters if they have them at that end of the scale. But over time, within a very short space of time, they can become basically unusable, whereas the springs retain your OEM units, which are often a much higher quality than you get on the budget end of the coilover market, so it has much more longevity within it. The budget coilovers often also come with really stiff springs, just the nature of the market at that end. So you also can end up with a really aggressive crashy car. Although it's nice and low and you've set your ride height, it can still lead to these issues. So we prefer to get what you're given in terms of ride height with lowering springs, take that as it is, and then run those long term and have a much more reliable, compliant chassis. If the adjustability of the ride height and the damping is something that you're really set on, then we would definitely advise moving up to the higher brands, even at the lower end of their offerings, just so you're getting a better quality product. It's worth the extra jump in money just to get a better quality coilover on your car, because long term you will thank yourself for it, and it will be more cost effective over the duration of ownership of the vehicle. So that's our summary on lowering springs, some of the benefits and negatives of installing them. We do class these as a really nice cost-effective upgrade, especially for road use. And again, we would recommend staying away from the really budget end of that coilover market for the reasons we've mentioned in this video. If you're interested in getting some lowering springs or coilovers for your car, you can head over to our shop linked in the description, or feel free, if you have any questions, to get in touch with a member of our team. If you want anything in particular covered in our future videos, please pop that in the comments. We'd love to hear your feedback, and then we can start to tailor these videos around exactly what you want to learn and hear.